Our show today on this edition of the World Jewish Congress Web Talks is about fighting anti-Semitism in the age of COVID-19. My name is Chaya and I am a World Jewish Congress Jewish diplomat in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm also the parliamentary and diplomatic liaison for the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and a former chairperson of the World Union of Jewish Students. Today we feature US State Department Special Envoy for Combating and Monitoring Anti-Semitism, Mr. Elan Carr. Welcome, Elan, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And first of all, thank you to the World Jewish Congress for the magnificent work that you do, for which I've been a great beneficiary in my diplomatic work overseas. It really is an organization that has made a deep and lasting impact on the Jewish people and really on a better world. And so I'm grateful to WJC, one of my great partner organizations, and to the Junior Diplomatic Program, of which you're a part, Chaya. Really, what a wonderful collection of leaders, and so thank you again. Thank you to the JD program, and thanks to the WJC for hosting this really important and urgent webinar at this time.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure, Elan. And for you joining us on this live stream, please leave your questions and comments below, and we'll get to them if we can. Elan, I know that you in your current role, you advise the Secretary of State and you are responsible for directing US policies and projects aimed at countering anti-Semitism throughout the world. So historically, Jews have not fared well during pandemics. Jews have been baselessly scapegoated by conspiracy theories that led to terrible anti-Semitism and the violent murder of Jews throughout the ages. In fact, these periods of pandemic birthed some of the classic anti-Semitic tropes that continue to resurface and dehumanize Jews. Has this global crisis breathed new life into centuries-old rhetoric that blames Jews for the spread of disease and economic downturns? Have you noticed any shifts in anti-Semitic sentiment or rhetoric that singles out Jews during this current pandemic of COVID-19?
Well, there's no question, and that's exactly right. I mean, there's a tsunami of anti-Semitism on the internet all over the world that blames Jews for creating the virus, for propagating and spreading the virus, for profiting from the virus, using this as some kind of, tool of global domination. I mean, you name it. But the only thing I would say is, while this is certainly new in the sense of, the coronavirus pandemic is new, and so the anti-Semitism that uses this as a vehicle to attack Jews is also new. But really, there's nothing new about anti-Semitism using current events to attack Jews. This is what anti-Semitism does. It morphs and adopts the flavor of the times and uses that current events and that milieu to attack Jews in that context. That has been the history of anti-Semitism. Like you said, I mean, the bubonic plague of the Middle Ages was continuously blamed on the Jews. Of course, it's absurd, but that's what happened. So there's really nothing new about this. Before there was a state of Israel, Jews were attacked for other reasons. Now that there's a state of Israel, one of the most visible forms of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism and Israel hatred. So again, it's people could always refer to this as new, but really there's nothing new about it. Now let me just say one more thing about that particular form of anti-Semitism that uses the pandemic and blames Jews for the pandemic. In addition to emanating from various sources on the internet, lone wolves, the fringe crazies on the right and the left, there's also another ingredient here, and this has to be addressed. Among the chief traffickers of this are certain state actors and quasi-state actors. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a major source of propagating this. And to think that a country, albeit a rogue country, but still a country, leaders of a country would actually engage in this kind of vicious anti-Semitism, again confirming what I said in my testimony on Capitol Hill, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is the world's chief trafficker in anti-Semitism today. That has to be addressed. Another source for quasi-state actors is the Palestinian Authority, which has been shameless in propagating the most base anti-Semitic canards about Jews, spreading virus to Palestinian children. I mean, it's just appalling. And so in addition to the lone wolves, we've got entities of authority doing this. It's unforgivable.
Well, so same tropes, modern tools. Social media is often a breeding ground for anti-Semitism and online hate. Do companies have a responsibility to limit the prevalence of such posts on their platforms? And what is the responsibility of governments, especially in a global context where different laws around free speech and censorship apply? Does your department work to monitor and combat anti-Semitism on the internet?
Yeah, so first of all, hate speech, whether it's anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, anti-religious sentiment, almost always violates the terms of use of these social media platforms. So you ask a very good question. Why aren't they enforcing these platforms? I participated in an excellent roundtable hosted by the ADL, for which I'm grateful, in New York, that brought tech giants to New York to discuss this very issue. I will say that things are improving. These tech companies are being more aggressive in policing their own domains. And again, this is about enforcing their own terms of service, not government censorship. And so things are improving there. But let me say something very important. You asked about the responsibilities of governments. First of all, yes, we have to address this. Governments have an obligation to address this because the chief vector of anti-Semitism today is the internet. It's not the cause of it, but it's the vehicle through which it spreads. And I'll tell you, a European study recently confirmed that the process, the period of time that it takes to radicalize a young man seduced into the venom and the hate that you see on these despicable chat rooms is 25% the time of the time it takes to radicalize someone offline. And so now there's data. This isn't just unpleasant or ugly. This is actually producing results. And when you lure and seduce people into these ever more venomous spaces and where they feed and get radicalized, it is extremely, extremely dangerous. And that's anti-Semitism, but it's also, so many other social systems. Right. Let me tell you what we're doing about it, Chaya. I am the first special envoy for anti-Semitism that has an assistant special envoy specifically devoted to internet hate. This has never before happened. So we are taking this so seriously that I have a member of my team at a senior level who focuses exclusively on this. And we are working on some very exciting initiatives and partnerships in partnership with NGOs and other private entities and the Israeli government that are doing incredibly, incredibly important work, not only in monitoring this, but in learning how this venom spreads all across the world and how it recruits and how it brings people in. We're working on this. And I'm confident that we can, in partnership with these organizations, roll this back, and not through censorship. Look, in the United States, we believe, we are champions of the First Amendment. And when it comes to speech that's unprotected, sure, incitement to violence is not protected speech. But hate speech that's protected cannot be censored. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. That doesn't mean we can't combat it. That doesn't mean we can't bring focused attention, shine light onto it, call people out for being the anti-Semites that they are and the haters that they are. We can do something about it that doesn't violate, the free speech rights and values that we in the United States believe are so important.
Sure, that's fantastic, amazing. Let me ask you, in terms of current forms of anti-Semitic ideology, the State Department assesses and describes the nature and the extent of acts of anti-Semitism and incitement. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism from the right, we're seeing a rise from the left, and even ideologically opposed alliances, sometimes uniting in their hatred of Jews. How is anti-Semitism currently being affected by evolving trends in identity politics? And how would you rank the current levels of threat along the ideological spectrum?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I mean, the amazing thing about anti-Semitism is its limitless irrationality and its ability to be adopted by ideological camps that really should hate each other, one would think, more than anything else on earth. The ethnic supremacist far right, the neo-Nazi types, the red banners and torchlit marches, the internet hate rooms and the synagogue shooters, the active shooters, by the way, not only synagogue shooters, mosque shooters, right? I mean, these are people who hate everyone other than themselves for the most part. And then you've got the radical left, the anti-nationalist, anti-Western, who define Israel as a hateful colonial power. Of course, it's not, and it's absurd. but their venom is really couched as anti-Zionism and hatred of anything that defines the Jewish people as a people, certainly hatred of the state of Israel. And then also a third camp too, militant Islam. The militant Islamists, again, most Muslims are not only welcoming of Jews, they can be philo-Semitic. I know personally, as an Iraqi Jew whose family came from that region, I know that's the case. But militant Islamists are deeply dangerous. And there too, militant Islam, the radical anti-nationalist and anti-religious left, the ethnic supremacist far right, united by one thing, and that is their hatred of the Jewish people. And I would argue, by the way, united also by the fundamental incompatibility of their values with everything on which good and free and decent countries and societies are built, which goes to show you how dangerous they are. So yes, that's what's happening. How would I evaluate the threat? You have to fight all of it. You know, one thing that we said when we began it, the first speech I gave a year and 3 months ago when I was appointed, is that we will not ignore any one of these three camps, nor will we minimize any one of them. Because, you know, if you're going to be serious about fighting anti-Semitism, you've got to fight all of it. If you leave 1/3 of a tumor untreated, the patient doesn't do well. So we're not going to leave 1/3 or 2/3 of this cancer unattended to. We're going to focus on all of it and fight all of it and combat all of it. I'm excited to say, by the way, that there are incredibly positive developments we're seeing in the Arab and Muslim world. The Arab and Muslim world is more aligned today to adopt a new narrative with regard to Jews and even the state of Israel than ever before, in part because of the Iranian threat, in part because of geopolitical realignments in the region. But we're working on incredibly exciting initiatives with our friends and allies in the Arab world to turn over a new page. And in fact, not so much a new page, an old page, where you know, Jews were in certain periods of time embraced and treasured as great communities in the Arab and Muslim world, from Baghdad to southern Spain at one point. Jews flourished under the Muslim empire. So in a sense, turning over a new page, but in a sense, rediscovering what the affection Islam had for Jews, and by the way, and for Christians as well. And so I'm very excited about these developments.
Well, one place where we do see a conflation of these three ideologies, as you've outlined it, is campus. And Elan, you were an international president of the Jewish fraternity AEPi, and in the course of your work in the Jewish community, you have been recognized as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism on US college campuses and around the world. So, I mean, this week in South Africa, some of our campuses are hosting a virtual Israel Apartheid Week. This annual hate fest on campuses inevitably leads to the vilification and harassment of Jewish students, and consistently degenerates into blatant anti-Semitism. Additionally, there's the challenge of recurring threats of academic boycotts of Israel, which often sees Jewish student unions campaigning for academic freedom. What is your assessment of the current climate on university campuses for Jewish students and academics?
Yeah, it's deeply unfortunate what's happening on far too many campuses. And in my diplomatic work overseas, I was surprised to discover that what Jewish students are saying in Europe, and I met with Jewish student leaders in the UK, in France, and in Europe generally, in the European Jewish Student Council, for example, they are reporting the very same thing that we hear from Jewish students in the United States on many campuses, which is that if you want to be safe as a student, if you want to go unmolested across your campus, you've got to check your identity at the door. You cannot say anything about Israel. You can't mention the word Zionist. You have to completely divorce yourself from that aspect of one's Jewish identity, namely the multi-millennial connection of the Jewish people to the Jewish homeland, to Eretz Israel, which isn't a new phenomenon. I mean, Zionism didn't begin in 1948. Zionism began when God says to Abraham, "Go forth to a land that I will show you." I mean, Zionism is as old as Judaism itself, namely that connection of the Jewish people as a people to the land. And the price Jewish students have to pay today on many, many campuses across the world is that they cannot express themselves. They have to basically go into hiding in order to be safe. There's a word for that. It's called anti-Semitism. It's also illegal, by the way. to discriminate and harass Jewish students is not legal. Not a question of free speech. Harassment and discrimination is not free speech. That's why I'm so proud in yet another bold move that shows that our administration in Washington, the Trump administration, is unprecedented in its commitment to fight anti-Semitism, to protect the Jewish people throughout the world, and to support the state of Israel. President Trump, in December, signed an executive order, again, unprecedented, a game-changing executive order that applies Title VI civil rights protections to Jewish students and says that universities that promote discrimination and harassment against Jewish students are going to lose their federal money. And I tell you, I was at the signing ceremony for that, and the president looked right at the cameras and said, let me make this very clear. If you're a university leader and you are promoting discrimination and harassment, this is going to be very, very expensive for you. And I promise you, not a single university president or chancellor did not hear that press conference. So we are determined to stand up and fight for Jewish students around the world who deserve better, who deserve to be in an academic environment free of discrimination and harassment, where they can be proud Jews and proudly express their identity on campus without fear of harassment and a violation of their rights as students.
And when it comes to this conflation of anti-Israel and anti-Semitism, there's been a great deal of conversation and debate in the international community about a need to objectively define anti-Semitism and the role that anti-Israel sentiment plays in that. Why, in your opinion, is that necessary? And is there a standard definition that you are promoting? Is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition the leading measure, in your opinion? And do you believe that it is adoptable in all contexts, given your work with governments around the world?
Well, yes, that is the definition. It's should be non-controversial. I would call it non-controversial. I mean, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, voted 56-1 to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. 56-1 among East and West countries that have very major differences is quite a statement. So I would call it non-controversial. It becomes controversial on campus, by the way, because groups that traffic in anti-Semitism will oppose the adoption of it because they don't want to be defined as trafficking in anti-Semitism, even though that's exactly what we're doing. And yes, Chaya, it is very, very important to have a definition, because when you have a definition of anti-Semitism, you are able to point to an objective reservoir of authority and say, look, what you just said is anti-Semitic. Do you realize that? Let's talk about it. And it allows us to really educate people. It's not about censorship, by the way. I mean, to define anti-Semitism has nothing to do with censoring anti-Semitism. It has everything to do with understanding what we're talking about. And the power of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is that in addition to defining it, it also gives examples of contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism that not only include blaming the Jews for the troubles in the world, like you began this interview with, right, the coronavirus pandemic, but it also includes the more modern manifestations of anti-Semitism. So, for example, in the IRA definition, the examples given, denying the Jewish people self-determination, for example, by claiming that the founding of the State of Israel was a racist endeavor, an example of anti-Semitism. Comparing or equating Israel with the Nazis is an example of anti-Semitism. Subjecting Israel to a double standard that no other democratic country in the world has held is an example of anti-Semitism. And so the power of the IRA definition is it allows us to refer to an objective source of authority. And that's very, very important, which, again, I'm so proud that in December, President Trump signed an executive order that formally adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism across the entire federal government. We at the State Department had been using it for a few years, but now it is in an executive order that the president signed to adopt it for across the interagency in the federal government. More and more countries are adopting the definition. President Macron, the UK has adopted it. Canada, I mean, the list goes on, and we're very, very excited. Of course, Germany, we're very, very excited about this growing list of countries that are saying enough is enough. We need to have a definition so that we can call this out for what it is.
Right. So in your various bilateral engagements and formal coordination with governments around the world. What are, perhaps this, and what are some of the other key priorities that you focus on in terms of assessing and encouraging the fundamental responsibilities that governments have to their Jewish citizens as minority constituencies? And do you believe that these rights, are universally acknowledged and respected by all countries? Do you have to customize your strategic engagement for each country or region? In that context, I can understand why a definition would be valuable.
That's exactly right, by the way. And because every country is different, anti-Semitism is global. And you can find the same causes in the United States as in Europe and Latin America, right? But every country has its own context, its own triggers. And so, yes, but I'll tell you what our global priorities are that apply almost everywhere. First and foremost, physical security. Because if one does not have security, if you can't leave your home and feel that you're safe, or put your kids on a school bus and know that they'll return safely, you cannot live that way. You cannot have quality of life. So the physical security of Jewish communities is top on our agenda. And so everywhere I go, if a country does not help the Jewish community secure itself, that is my top diplomatic ask. Let's do that. The Department of Homeland Security in the United States, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, does that. The UK is excellent, £9 million a year as a grant to the CST to do that. So we need every country doing that. Second of all, hate crime prosecutions, critical. We've seen very unfortunate situations where hate crimes charges have been dismissed in countries that have very healthy judicial systems. Why is that? Well, because there's not enough training in it. And so, I was just recently in Europe, where we had conferences specifically dealing on this. We brought law enforcement leaders from interior and justice ministries together specifically to discuss how to properly investigate, prosecute, and appropriately punish hate crimes. I'm a former prosecutor, Chaya. I did this professionally. I know that we can do this. I know also, by the way, that even when a crime is minor, a misdemeanor or an infraction, you still can intervene in a person's life and force them to undergo a program that teaches tolerance and opens their minds. It doesn't have to be a felony, right? So these are issues that I've dealt with not only in Europe, but in the United States. And so we're working on hate crimes prosecution and punishment. The IRA definition, we already talked about it, but one of my top diplomatic asks when I go overseas, if a country has not adopted this critical game-changing definition of anti-Semitism, I ask that they do. Also, furthermore, not only adopt the definition, but appoint an anti-Semitism coordinator. Because, if you want something done, someone has to be in charge of getting it done. That's the way the world works. And so if you're serious about combating anti-Semitism, appoint somebody in the government, in the office of the prime minister or the interior minister, specifically charged with combating anti-Semitism in the country, critically important. Another area is the internet. I already talked about it, but we are laser-like focused on dealing with this because it is so critical, not only to combating anti-Semitism, but to stopping the propagation of racism and xenophobia and hate on the internet. And then lastly, and I left a very, very important point for last, and that is not only to play defense. Everything I've talked about so far is in effect a defensive measure against anti-Semitism. You have to play defense. You've got to have defensive measures, but you don't win a battle only by playing defense. You've got to go on the offense. And the way to go on the offense against anti-Semitism is by driving a philo-Semitic narrative, because the opposite of anti-Semitism isn't tolerance of Jews. Very few people aspire to be tolerated. The opposite of anti-Semitism is philo-Semitism, treasuring, respecting, and having affection for Jewish values and the profound contributions that the Jewish people have brought to the world and to every country where there has been a Jewish community. And so we are focused on that. And how do you do that, Chaya? One way to do that, education. And so our final priority that I want to talk about is education, education, and education. Not only education in anti-Semitism, that's important. We talk about Holocaust education, critically important. But I'm talking about driving a philo-Semitic narrative so that every kid in every classroom in every country knows what the Jewish people are and what the Jewish people have brought to that country. Let me give you one example, two examples. This month today, May, in the United States, is Jewish American Heritage Month. we have been very much focused in championing Jewish American Heritage Month and creating a curriculum that will drive that philo-Semitic narrative into every classroom in the United States, and then also overseas. Germany, for example, next year, 2021, is commemorating 1,700 years of Jewish history in Germany. How amazing would it be if Germany commemorates that year, not only with a declaration in January that's over in a day, but actually with a curriculum, so that every German kid in the country knows that it's 1,700 years and knows what the content of that is and what the Jewish people have brought to Germany. We can really change the world doing this. And so we are very much focused on driving that philo-Semitic narrative to go on the offense against anti-Semitism.
It's really fantastic, because I think everywhere in the world it's acknowledged that the Jewish communities are, a minority that punches way above its weight and contributes disproportionately wherever it is.
Awesome.
To be able to highlight that, if we don't tell our story, no one will.
And vice versa. I asked when I was in Germany, I said, we can talk about Jewish contributions to Germany. There's a very long list. I said, but how many German kids know that the vernacular language of Ashkenazi Judaism from Russia to England is a form of German? How many German kids know that? The answer is nobody knows that. Why not? So let's get serious about driving this philo-Semitic narrative.
That's fantastic. And even in terms of my own work as the parliamentary liaison for the Jewish Board of Deputies, my job is to go into Parliament and present the Jewish community as stakeholders, as voters, as taxpayers that want to contribute in the general national interest on all issues, on all topics. So looking historically at the contribution of the Jewish community and currently what Jewish communities contribute to society wherever they are. That's very important. Very important.
Very.
It's so amazing how all the different parts of your experience, from being the deputy district attorney for Los Angeles counties, where you worked as a prosecutor, prosecuting violent crimes for more than a decade, including hate crimes, how you worked to establish an independent Iraqi judiciary and training Iraqi judges and lawyers on constitutional law and criminal defense during your tour in Iraq, how this has impacted your work in terms of this increasingly critical and challenging arena in the courts in South Africa and France, all over the world. And then also, as you mentioned, your experience also working, in Jewish communities, that you were formerly a voting member of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, and serving on the National Council of AIPAC, and that in your work you consult with domestic and international non-governmental and multilateral organizations and institutions. So the World Jewish Congress is a representative body of Jewish communities in over 100 countries around the world. We are the local stakeholders and NGOs in our countries. What has your experience been in working with local Jewish communities and Jewish communal organizations? Do you have the access and cooperation you need? Do you have any further advice and suggestions from all the wonderful things you've raised for us on how we can better protect Jewish life and Jewish way of life in our communities?
Yeah, so absolutely. And in fact, I'm so happy you asked that question, because my standard operating procedure before I visit any country is to bring together all of the stakeholders, those Jewish organizations that do work on the ground there, some in that country, local Jewish organizations, sometimes WJC affiliates, but sometimes not, either way, and also other organizations that are global. So for example, it's very typical that I would get briefings from WJC, AJC, certainly ADL, if Eastern and Central Europe, NCSCJ, and a number of others, sometimes NGO Monitor, by the way. And I would get briefings specifically on the goings on in that country. I'll talk to local leaders, often through the WJC and your affiliates. I'll talk to leaders on the ground there. And so, of course, and I also get intelligence briefings and embassy briefings from the State Department. But before I even set foot on the ground in a country, I do all of that homework so that I know what's going on. And then again, that's before I sit down with the Jewish community. I know what's going on. But also it brings the Jewish world in and invests all of these stakeholders in the diplomatic work we're doing. Very, very important, because I want to have that buy-in, not only because it educates me and informs our diplomacy, but it also helps to create unity in the Jewish world. And if the Jewish people can stand united against anti-Semitism, then I have no doubt that anti-Semitism will lose that fight. And but oftentimes, sadly, the Jewish people are desperate need of unity. And so this is one way of helping to breed that. And definitely WJC has been a critical partner in this, not only through its affiliates, but by the way, the WJC as the international entity itself. The JDs are a great example, by the way. I often receive briefings directly from the JDs before I go to a country, in addition to from the local WJC affiliate, and also from other Jewish organizations not affiliated to WJC on the ground in a country. And then, of course, when I arrive in the country, I actually meet with the Jewish community. My first stop after our own embassy, after the US embassy, is the Jewish community. I don't meet with the government of that country until I meet with the Jewish community first, because I want the Jewish community to know the United States has their back, and I want the government to know that we know exactly what's going on the ground. And by the way, it's not only for bad things. You know, many countries, and it's very important to talk about good news too, many countries are doing phenomenal things. And when I meet with our friends and allies around the world, in addition to working on issues we need to work on, you know, I want to thank them for doing excellent work. I mean, we want to sit down and say, listen, you know, when the German and the Austrian Bundestags, the German Bundestag and the Austrian Parliament passed legislation that says BDS is anti-Semitism. You know, when you've got unbelievable national coordinators fighting anti-Semitism in the UK, like Lords Mann and Pickles, in France, like Frédéric Potier, in the EU, Katharina von Schnurbein, who is a treasure. I mean, she's been a game changer for Europe. Of course, Felix Klein in Germany, who Felix Klein, I want you to know about Felix Klein, one of my heroes, who has been absolutely fantastic, and he's not shy about calling out all kinds of anti-Semitism, including BDS. And so when BDS is anti-Semitic, which it is, and the Bundestag voted that it is, Felix Klein will stand up and take heat and say, this is anti-Semitism, and he will fight it and oppose it. We need to say thank you to people like that, and we need to say thank you to the governments that appoint people like that. And so a lot of my work is really to support and strengthen with the full weight of the United States, our friends and allies who are doing such great work.
Oh, wonderful. It's such a positive note, but I just want to ask one more question. Just based on your personal history, that you're an officer in the United States Army Reserve, and you've received multiple awards and commendations for your 2 decades of military service, that in 2003, 2004, you were deployed to Iraq, and that you speak the Iraqi dialect of Arabic because you are the son of Iraqi Jewish refugees who fled persecution in Iraq. And then while you were there, you met with remnants of the Jewish community that's still there, and you in fact led Jewish services in the former presidential palace of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. I believe you lit a Hanukkah menorah. So you know from very personal experience about Jewish families being forced to leave their home countries due to anti-Semitism. You know, we're 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Are there Jewish families around the world currently facing this dilemma to stay, to go? And are they in circumstances that are still salvageable? In this COVID-19 kind of lockdown where everyone's had time to pause and possibly reevaluate, is there, you know, what is the current status of Jewish communities around the world? So,
you know, first of all, my experience in Iraq, you know, wasn't only, it started with Hanukkah, but then I helped lead a minyan every single week for Shabbat in the former presidential palace of Saddam Hussein, which was, you know, a remarkable statement because it was from that same building that Saddam, 10 years or so earlier, gave the order to fire Scud missiles into Israel. And here we were coming together as Jewish service personnel in uniform and civilians to express our Jewish identity in a place that had been a place of evil and then became a place of reconstruction and freedom. And what a great moment that was, especially for the son of refugees who fled that very place. You know, when my mother was a young girl, she remembers a knock at the door, and soldiers came, and my grandfather still had shaving cream on his face. It was early in the morning, and they dragged him away and put him in prison for no reason other than he was Jewish. And so my family literally fled anti-Semitic persecution, and now well, first of all, then to go to Iraq to help build a free and decent Iraq was a privilege, and now to be in this role, to lead, to be America's lead diplomat in fighting anti-Semitism globally is one of the greatest privileges I could ever imagine, and so it's wonderful. Now, with regard to making Aliyah and fleeing countries to go to Israel, Chaya, this is a very important point. Nobody should make aliyah out of fear and out of flight. We believe, look, we're not against aliyah. You know, if somebody wants to embrace, that aspect of their Jewish identity, and not only feel a connection to the land of Israel, but want to live in the land of Israel and want to be Israeli, wonderful, more power to them. But they shouldn't do that for any reason other than positive reasons. They certainly shouldn't have to do it because they're running away from danger. And so we believe that every Jew in the world should have the right and the ability to stay exactly where they are and be safe where they are. Now, if they want to leave, that's fine. But we want them to know that they can and have a right to stay exactly where they are and be free from persecution, from discrimination, from danger, from anti-Semitism. And so we're very much focused on that. Now, is there hope for that? Yes, 100%. I mean, I get asked all the time, well, what's going to happen in Europe? Is there a future for Jews in country A or country B? My answer is yes. There's a future for Jews in every single country, because if Jews embrace Jewish life and stand up proudly and partner with us, the United States government, and all of the wonderful Jewish organizations that are doing great work, and the State of Israel, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is doing phenomenal work fighting for Jewish communities everywhere. If Jewish communities embrace Jewish life and partner with governments and with these Jewish organizations, yes, there is a future for Jewish life, and there's a future for Jewish life everywhere, and that's very, very important. Now, is there a future for Jewish life in Iran, a country that is the world's leading trafficker in anti-Semitism, that supports, funds, and commands and controls the genocidally anti-Semitic Hezbollah? Is there a future for Jews there? Well, I hope there would be, but Iran has to change its tune. And that's why the United States walked out of the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. That's why we are applying pressure and sanctions. That's why we are insisting that that Iran be held to conduct, not to a double standard that excuses their mischief and their terror and the death and bloodshed that they've sown all across the Middle East and frankly in Latin America and in other parts of the world, but that they be held to account. That's why the United States has made this the top priority. And right now, as you know, Secretary Pompeo, my boss, is in Israel to coordinate with Israel, not only to state our absolute unwavering support for the state of Israel and its right of self-defense, but also to coordinate our efforts to contain the mischief and the disasters brought upon the world by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I'm very proud that the United States, even in the midst of a pandemic, is standing with the state of Israel today in the midst of this pandemic by our Secretary of State, standing shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Netanyahu and soon to be Deputy Prime Minister, soon to be Speaker of the Knesset, Benny Gantz.
Well, I can't tell you how empowering this has been for me, how privileged I feel to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And for everybody who's listening, I think we all feel a bit safer going to bed tonight, wherever we are in the world, knowing that you are on the front lines, that you are there to protect not only Jewish life and Jewish way of life, but to safeguard the world from the scourge of anti-Semitism and to make society more tolerable and to make the world a better place. I mean, it's really, it's quite moving. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And really, I can only commend the State Department for being able to adapt and to be able to still continue on with this fight, even under the circumstances of this COVID pandemic. And I know you're very busy, but thank you for taking this time to talk to us. And I really hope we can welcome you in South Africa sometime soon. Our Jewish community would be very happy to host you.
I very much look forward.
And it'll be wonderful. And to anybody who's listening in, tune in tomorrow for our web talk at 11 a.m. Eastern with special guest Rabbi Andrew Baker, who's personal representative of the OSCE chairperson and combating anti-Semitism and the agency director of international Jewish affairs.
Let me say, you're all in for a treat. Andy Baker, Rabbi Baker, he's a dear friend and he does amazing work. So you're in for a treat.
Wonderful. So just on behalf of the World Jewish Congress, thank you to Elan, and we just wish you all the best in this very important work that you're doing. We're all with you and behind you, however we can, support you in any way. And to all of you watching at home, to all of us, Hashem, may we all be protected in our goings and our comings. We should just wash our hands, stay home, and stay safe.